Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the revised ESRS. We're so pleased to have all of you join us this morning. We have close to 500 participants on the call today, so it's really exciting to see this high interest for this topic as we together get ready for the new age of sustainability reporting, as the heading for this session also says. We have 1 hour for this webinar. It's also being recorded. So if you, for some reason, can't watch the full session or you want to share the link with a colleague afterwards, that's completely possible. So after the session, we'll share the link to where you can find the recording. Let's go to the agenda for today. So next slide, please. We are today joined by some lovely guests from Pandora and Ørsted. We have Gadegaard from Pandora and Merete, Lerche, Thinggaard from Ørsted. Welcome and good morning to both of you. We're so pleased to have you here with us. And I also have my good colleague and I also have my good colleague Sven Beyersdorff, who will be with us moderating today. We'll do a little round of introduction in just a minute's time so everyone knows who's who. The topic for today is ESRS. So we'll start off by explaining what this new framework is and what you need to know about it. Then we have 2 company examples, as I already mentioned, where we will hear from your experiences, Anne and Merete, how you and your respective companies are now preparing for this new framework and really have been working with it already for quite a few months. And then we'll round off with a Q&A. We're also in parallel running the chat Q&A. So if you have questions in the chat, you can post them throughout this session. And we have colleagues online who will try and answer questions already as we go along through the session. Otherwise, we'll try and tackle as many as possible at the end. So welcome, everyone. Let's do a little round of introductions. Since I'm already speaking, I'll just shortly introduce myself. My name is Anniina Kristinsson. I'm a principal here at Nordic Sustainability. I have about 15 years professional experience, most of that from the policy field, where I've been following the environmental and sustainability legislation space for close to 10 years, and also corporate experience from when I was working in Hempel AS as their global strategy lead for a few years before I joined Nordic Sustainability. Anne, would you like to go next in terms of saying just a few words about who you are, your role today, and a little bit about your background?
Yes, thank you so much, Anniina, and sorry for interrupting you before this. Thank you for the invite. My name is Anne, and I worked within the sustainability field for plus 25 years. And the reason why I'm here today is because I currently have a position as sustainability data manager, located in Pandora, sitting with the finance team in order to work with the sustainability data, preparing for some of the new reporting requirements. And I guess throughout my career, reporting has been an element. Actually, for the Danes here, when we used to have green accounts, I was part of the team writing the guidebook to the green accounts, the legal green accounts, and I've done various tasks around reporting ever since. So thank you for the invite.
Great to have you with us, Anne, today. And Merete, would you like to go next?
Yes, of course. And also, I was like, very much thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure. I'm educated Denmark out. I started my career in KPMG, and then I went to a bank, and now I'm on my 16th year here in Ørsted. So the first 8 years in Ørsted, I was a financial controller in our group finance department. And then I became curious on the CSR strategy in the company. And I moved around through different positions along with the green transformation of the company, actually. I've primarily been working with the environment part of the ESG. And currently I'm working on the project, taking our ESG reporting to the next level. I'll come back to that later. Thank you.
Great to have you both with us. Thank you for being here and sharing about your experiences. Sven, you will be moderating this session. So not only am I going to ask you to say a little bit about who you are and who Nordic Sustainability is, but then I actually hand over the moderating torch to you to take us through the rest of the session. Go ahead, Sven.
Thanks, Anniina, and thanks everybody for being here. My name is Sven. I co-founded Nordic Sustainability about 5 years ago. Have a background with the UN and the McKinsey spin-off and different other roles. And for those of you who don't know us as Nordic Sustainability, very briefly, we are a Copenhagen-based strategy consultancy working exclusively with sustainability. And normally we do quite extensive impact materiality-based baseline assessments and strategies on the back of those, where we go quite deep into how companies actually need to transform in their design work, their product portfolio work, their supply chain work, to come to that a utopian end state of sustainability. We try to be very science-based in our approach, try to also change the landscape of consulting a little bit by aiming to work in a 4-day work week as a company. And we've been lucky to work with many of the Danish ambitious companies as well as many international ones. Enough about us, though. I think Anniina, maybe you can take it away from here with the intro of the ESRS.
Yes, happy to. So let's go to the next few slides. This section is all about this new exciting European sustainability reporting framework and what you need to know about it. But let's start by looking at the big picture first. Next slide, please. So there is one message we really wanted to highlight today, and perhaps it's a little bit of a provocative one, but just to make sure everyone on the call here stays awake, we're going to start off with this. So ESRS is about reporting, or is it really about transformation? We have looked through the ESRS in its entirety for the past few months as it's been in development, and we've become more and more convinced as we work with it that it's really more about transformation than it is about reporting. Yes, it triggers a need to report, but really, if you look at the intent behind this framework and what it is trying to do, it is about accelerating a green and just transformation of our societies and our businesses. And it's really quite radical in its approach, since it is so comprehensive and so ambitious across the line. So any company that aims at doing ESRS reporting should really brace themselves in terms of not only the data collection journey they have ahead of them, but also the transformation journey that it's going to trigger. I think you all have heard the words, if you can measure it, you can manage it. Well, this thinking is taking it one step further. Not only is it about measuring it and managing it, but in order to manage it, a lot of businesses out there will need to have to reconsider how they do business today, and how to manage those impacts in their value chains will trigger some needs to look at things in a completely new way across our company field in Europe, and also beyond Europe's limits, since a lot of those value chains are global. So that's what we want to kick this day off with, and also round off later today. Let's take a look at the next slide, please. So what does the reporting or regulation landscape actually look like today? This is a little bit of a simplified picture. We know that there's so much happening right now in the regulatory space in Europe, and it's of course all triggered by the EU Green Deal and that strong political push there is for accelerating a green transition in Europe. Today we're focusing on the ESRS, so the new European Sustainability Reporting Standards, which is really the mechanism under the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. The CSRD recently got approved in all the relevant EU institutions and is now set to become national law. So the CSRD has been approved at EU level, and ESRS is now in the final stages for the first set of the topical standards as well. So this is a really, really exciting time for everyone watching this space, and a lot of new changes are coming because of that. It's also linked to other things cooking in the big EU Green Deal field. The EU taxonomy is linked to the CSRD, and also we're now waiting for developments on the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which we probably will learn about much more as we go along into 2023, and how that also links with the due diligence element to the CSRD. And of course, there's a whole bunch of other regulatory initiatives that will influence corporates down the line as well. So just to say, it's a part of a bigger landscape. Today, we're going to zoom in on the ESRS and what that actually means. Next slide, please. An important thing to keep in mind is that we have different companies that are in scope here, and they are going to be impacted by the CSRD and also consequently by the ESRS in four waves. So the ESRS, the reporting standards, the entity behind the standards, EFRAG, has handed over their drafts to the European Commission. There's now a process period of approximately 6 months before they get formally approved. So June 23 is when we are set to have the final formal approval of those first topical standards. However, already in their current format, we can feel pretty assured that that we know what we're dealing with, because the package is so comprehensive in its nature that the expectation for many changes to happen between now and June really is quite low. And the first batch of companies that need to start reporting on these new standards are actually in scope already starting January 2024, where they then need to do their first reporting in 2025 based on the full year of 24. And these are listed companies with over 500 employees, the companies that already were in scope for the previous directive, which the CSRD now replaces. These companies are, of course, now in quite a rush to prepare. Setting up the right reporting structures takes time. That's also why we have Pandora and Ørsted with us on the call today to tell about their preparations and the steps they are taking. And also from dialogue with other of our collaboration partners and clients, we know that a lot of companies are now rushing to make this deadline. However, it doesn't end there. The next batch of companies starts to report according to these new standards from 2025 and onwards, with their first report then in 2026. Here we have another set of big companies, non-listed companies that meet at least 2 of the criteria that we have here on the slide. And then finally, listed SMEs in 2026 and onwards. And also for non-European companies, there's a later timeline as well.
Anniina, there's a question about non-listed SMEs. Those, maybe you can say.
So non-listed SMEs are not in scope for this directive as it is right now. However, of course, all also SMEs that are supply partners to these companies that are in scope will need to start delivering data to their clients. So there's that indirect linkage to non-listed SMEs as well. Good. Next slide, please. So let's look thematically at what themes the ESRS covers. Here is really where you start to see how comprehensive it is. We already got to see the first set of standards, the drafts in April. Then there was a public consultation and some shuffling around in these themes, since there were a lot of also pushback on some of the elements. The governance section is the one that now we see the biggest changing as we see the November drafts, since they have now taken out one of the governance sections and integrated them into some of the other elements, or completely removed them from the standards. Otherwise, the themes are still intact. There are some other changes as well in the package. I'm going to talk through those on the next slide. However, thematically, it is still a very comprehensive package that we're dealing with. Worthwhile noting as well is now we have the drafts for these first topical standards. So these are the standards all companies need to start reporting on, both in their operations and value chain. And we're going to talk about the value chain a little bit later on as well. So what is worth keeping in mind is that this is the foundation. After that, we'll get sector standards for several sectors as well. And the first 10 ones are going to be released already in Q2 2023. You see the list of these here on the slide. So that will add another layer on top of these topical standards, and more sectors are going to be released later on as well. Let's go to the next slide, please. This slide is for all of you who are really into the details. So what are the changes between April and November in terms of the drafts that we now have from EFRAG? There's been a reduction in the number of disclosure requirements. However, as we go through the package, we can see that much of that is actually consolidation. So things have been made a little bit more coherent, and there's a better sense of consolidation throughout. However, there's not that many topics that have been removed entirely. I already mentioned the second part, the ESRS G1, which now has been eliminated from the initial 13 standards, and also a principle called the rebuttable presumption that now no longer is in these drafts. The rebuttable presumption was the requirement that a company needed to explain why a certain area was non-material for them. Now it's been strengthened in terms of the materiality element, and then what you need to follow is really the material impacts in your value chain and how you report. There was also quite a lot of pushback on the value chain data, saying that it's unrealistic for companies to start preparing value chain data on such a short notice, and especially the SMEs that are in the value chain will experience a lot of pressure in terms of reporting back to the bigger companies. So now there is, first of all, a reporting boundary specified in terms of the material impacts in the value chain, and also a phase-in of 3 years has been included for a lot of the value chain information. So that means that for the value chain information, on top of the timeline I just showed you, there is actually a phase-in of up to 3 years for many of those areas for value chain information. That does not mean that you can just wait for 3 years before you start disclosing anything in your value chain. You actually already need to start disclosing what you know. So they refer to something called in-house information. And also you can and should use secondary sources where they are available, for example, sector average data. In the interest of time, I won't go through some of the topical changes. We have put them on the slide here for you in terms of looking at them. We picked out 3 of the topical standards. There are changes in others as well, but here in ESRS E1, S1 and G1 are some of the changes that are maybe worthwhile looking into a little bit closer if you already had started working systematically with this before you saw the November drafts. Next slide, please. So, as I already mentioned, ESRS is coming fast. There are only a few companies in Europe today that are actually prepared to report on that strategic and operational level that this requires. There's approximately 50,000 companies in total that need to start to report on the ESRS throughout the upcoming years. And right now, there's not that many of them that are actually prepared to report in this new way. One of the key shifts that the ESRS triggers is, of course, the double materiality concept. This is something most of us in the sustainability field are familiar with. In the reporting field, it's still something that only the more ambitious companies are applying already today, I would say. So the concept of double materiality is not only reporting on what are your impacts as a company outwards, but also how does sustainability impact you inwards as a company. Climate is a classic example on this. So most companies have certain degree of CO2 emissions. That's their outward impact. But climate impacts are actually starting to impact companies as well from an external point of view. So increased risk due to climate-related weather events, for example, or carbon taxation are examples of external impacts that influence you as a company. And also will have a financial impact on you. And those are the things that you need to report on as well moving forward. The entire value chain is considered, and Sven will just in a few moments' time explain a little bit what that can look like for a company. This is, of course, something that's vastly ambitious and one of the absolute major changes that we will see in this landscape moving forward. Right now, the majority of companies are still reporting very much on their own operations only. There is also a strong link to business model and strategy. This is also one of the things that has maybe not been discussed that much yet, but the ESRS actually articulates that you as a company need to be able to explain how the impacts link to your business model and your business strategy, and how you're taking steps to actually mitigate that via your business model. There needs to be transparency on the methodology on how you've done your double materiality assessment. And also there will be a requirement on third-party assurance on your data moving forward. And of course, the expansion of data capacity is something that will really be one of the first steps the companies need to take as they embark on this journey, because there will be a need not only to sharpen up what data you collect internally in your company, but also to start collecting data from suppliers, or to move in a direction where there is more unison data across industries. Next slide, please. I think actually this rounds off my intro. I see there are a lot of good questions popping up in the chat as well that we will tackle as we get to the Q&A. Sven, I think I'll hand over here to you so that you can talk through the next few slides.
Thanks for the intro, Anniina. I think you already mentioned a few of the aspects, of course, but it's always good to repeat the main messages. And here just a couple slides on why we think the ESRS will trigger such a strategic shift in what companies have to focus on when they work with sustainability. Anniina mentioned the supply chain aspect or the value chain aspect already, and maybe we can just play that through on an example, right? I mean, this is an obviously idealized example of a fashion industry value chain. So a company that sells fashion products has, obviously some raw material inputs somewhere up in the value chain. There has some steps in the actual clothing production, has some steps throughout the distribution, the use of the items, as well as, of course, the after use recycling or other impacts that are there. And so a company would then under ESRS have to map all the different impacts that are listed in the ESRS across these different value chain steps. And of course, many of these companies, by the time we're talking about the size of companies that we're covering here, will have many multiple of these kinds of supply chains from multiple, getting the product inputs from multiple places in the world, having multiple production sites. And that's before we even get to, of course, other procurement categories or supply chain purchase categories that those companies might still have as well. So a typical and even most leading companies will still obviously have a lot of impacts regards to biodiversity and the raw material production, water issues in the clothing production, downstream issues if we talk about plastics products or nylon-based products when we talk about pollution and microplastics. And of course, when we consider that the EU asks those companies to outline how those impacts have a business link, right? A business strategy link, how the company, how these impacts and the solving of these impacts might affect the company's revenue going forward, right? It has to set targets very much in a way akin to what science-based targets, the kind of mechanism that we see with science-based targets, right? To set targets, come up with reduction plans, and then implement those over time. We can see that it's starting to have big implications of how a company would run its business. And of course, that would have quite strong commercial strategy implications. And we, of course, have been arguing for the need to add sustainability thinking into corporate strategies for a long time, because the main impacts that companies have are not solved simply by bolting on sustainability strategies to what companies have been doing. So all this language that I just mentioned, right, the business strategy aspect, the links to potential revenue losses, even R&D investments and business resilience considerations, they're all part of the ESRS and something that companies will have to think about going forward. And of course, again, it's easy to see how that might affect a company's commercial strategy. So when you start working with the ESRS and think of the kind of trajectory of preparing your company going forward, and for the 24 or later disclosures, it's quite interesting how right now most of the discussions in the scene are around the initial steps, those data gap assessments, that impact mapping, the materiality assessments, right? But much more crucial and much more important to understand long term are, of course, those business model links, right? The targets and metrics and how companies will articulate how they reduce their impacts going forwards, and likely build a lot of new strategic programs and commercial strategies, right? Having looked at, we don't think almost any company would not be commercially affected by what's coming here, right? And that is, of course, also the intention of the EU, as Anniina has already outlined. That also means when you set up your data gap assessment and materiality assessment processes, you probably want to include functions such as the risk function, the finance function, and ideally even the corporate strategy functions in those processes, so that they start building the capacity to understand these kinds of shifts as they happen, and can feed that into the typical strategy processes. And we've very much seen that as part of our last strategy processes over the last year or so, where again we're going very deeply now into product portfolio discussions, into revenue risk discussions, into design discussions, into supply chain resiliency from that sustainability perspective, right? So again, sustainability transformation is very much coming here. You can't anymore do a materiality assessment by sitting together with some colleagues in the sustainability team's ivory tower. It has to be a much broader exercise, and ideally be anchored to answer those strategic points over time. Those were my 2 slides. With that, I'll hand over to Anna.
Thank you so much, Sven. And then some perspectives from a company, and maybe I think also a little bit on reflection on what I can see works and what doesn't work, also in a bigger picture. So first, if we can go to the next slide, I just wanted to make sure that you would know what Pandora is. So Pandora is a global jewelry brand. If you go to the next, thank you very much. Which sells 102 million pieces of jewelry every year. This is the number for last year. You might know the bracelet and the charms. This is done in a handcrafted, hand-finished process out of Thailand. What we do significantly, we do a lot of things on sustainability, but the 2 pieces I want to highlight here is the one you can see in the down-hand corner, is that we work towards getting 100% recycled silver and gold into our products. So that means we won't have mined silver and gold in our products from 2025. And then also the other bit is that we have, as many other companies, a science-based target. So when doing this, we will also try to do it in a zero carbon process. But that's also going forward, 2030, that's the ambition. So that's what I really like, that we actually got into the product and said, how can we change what we are doing? Next slide, please. Then we have the whole, what is going to come across our tables going forward. And having been around for a while, I have to say, I really think, of course, there are details, but I think the EU has really done a good job here. I think there's some things that, of course, maybe it's not practitioners who sat and done the actual work, but I do think that the road ahead of us in terms of transforming what we need to do also as corporations are very, very promising. I know there's a huge mountain we have to climb in terms of understanding the data, understanding what we have to report, but also understanding how this will impact the way that we do business going forward. But if you hold on to that thought of this actually being a promising road that we are going on, a journey that we will be going into, I think that will drive the motivation. And I think also it will drive the sort of conversations you're going to have in the organization. So Sven just mentioned the risk, the finance, the corporate strategy departments, but there's a number of departments where you will have to have a much more integrated conversation in order to deliver what is actually intended to be delivered upon. I know it comes across as a lot of compliance, and my first advice is the great potential will have to be, you have to link it just to the business strategy, not the sustainability strategy. And before you can do this, you will need the data in order to inform the decision processes of the company. And I think also with the compliance and the governance, having to link it into the audit committees, etc., also means that the requirement to the data that has so far been disclosed by most companies has to change as well. So there's a lot of work to do. And I can only say, even though you're not part of, you can say, the first group of companies who have to comply with this, get started, because there are some pretty hard tasks that you have to onboard and get working with. I won't even talk about IT system and automation, but if you are going to succeed with this, this is what you have to think of as well. And I think I heard it presented at some point that this is not just about sustainability data coming into the main road. It's actually also understanding that the way businesses are making decisions, they have throughout the many past 100, 150 years added information to when making information. And this is just the next set of data that will inform the decision-making processes in a corporation. So what we've done in Pandora, and that will be the next slide, is that we have looked at a double materiality process. We are not ready to report about it right now, but we have done it. We have a pretty good idea how it looks according to the strategy we have right now. Also, where we have gaps on data, because I would be surprised if any company has the level of data needed to actually follow the guidelines in the CSRD. We have done a model account this year. This is very much talking finance, so understanding what are the processes that will kind of get not the attention, but kind of start to wove in the processes of getting the approvals, engaging with the CFO, engaging with the finance community in your company. So we've done a model account this year. We will be having accounting policies for all the data that we disclose in our sustainability role, etc., etc. Then we're working on improving the quality of data. So we are doing internal controls throughout the year, looking very much, because we don't have everything automized. We are even diving into doing spot samples and full reviews on documentation for the data points we have. We also have external assurance that will also be a requirement. And here just a footnote, even though it says the limited assurance firsthand, so review, you will at some point, most likely we will be required to do reasonable assurance, which is the same as an audit. So also already now start to have that conversation with the audit provider. What does that mean, and what is it you have to prepare for? Because there will be some things you might as well tweak when you go ahead and do it right now, rather than wait until it's been decided to have the reasonable assurance. We work with the threshold for sustainability data. So that's the whole, how accurate does data actually have to be? As some of us know, financial data are accurate, but they are not 100% necessarily correct. You work with threshold. We have implied the same on sustainability data. We are going, as you can see, we haven't done digitalization or automation yet, but we will be integrating into the SAP project that we are doing in Pandora right now. And we will also be looking into closing the data gaps that we have found as part of our materiality process. Then we have revisit the governance, and we will also be looking into see, do we need to make any further adjustments according to now the new draft of the CSRD. And don't forget, this is one thing, is that we know what we have to do, but in terms of getting the whole organization onboarded, keep remembering yourself, how can you build competences, and how can you also build knowledge around where the different parts of the organizations need to be part of this journey. And if you go to my last slide, please, then you can see some of the results, not the actual result, but just to get you an idea. This is on climate change. So this is part of what we have done together with Nordic Sustainability on the double materiality. And as you can see, we have a science-based target. We do report on scope 1, 2, and 3 disclosures, but there are still areas where we come out where we have data gaps, not just kind of yellow data gaps, but also red lights in terms of we actually have to go out and get a much better data foundation. So this is the sort of activities that we have already initiated and will be following up on next year in order to prepare for the 1st of January 2024. Thank you so much, Sven.
Thanks a lot, Anna. Thanks for the good overview. And then next we'll hand over to you, Merete.
Yes, thank you a lot again for having me here. You just go to the next slide. Yes, I will jump directly into it. I'll not tell you about the green transformation Ørsted has been through because of the time limits here. But I can tell you that the green transformation Ørsted has been going through has linked perfectly to prioritizing ESG topics and the quality of data needed for that, as well as getting the buy-in from the top management several years ago. And in 2015, it was actually our CFO who initiated the ESG reporting 1.0. with the objective of give the business unit CFOs the accountability for ESG data and mirror the financial accounting and reporting process into the ESG area. And it was a success to do that. And in 2017, we launched our first standalone ESG performance report. And if you look at our webpage today, you can see it's actually the same format that we are still producing that quarterly report in. And since 2016, we have successfully built our sustainability programs with these ESG data, and we have greatly increased the engagement with ESG rating agencies to position the company as a front runner within sustainability. And then also to the point Anne mentioned, the auditors are very important here. We in 2018 had our auditor PwC to start to review part of our ESG data, and we started with the part of the data that was also integrated in the annual report and the financial annual the financial reports in quarterly reports, and then we expanded that scope of the ESG data the following years, so we have limited assurance of the ESG data. And then last year, we started also the EU taxonomy reporting already in the half-year results last year, disclosing the taxonomy eligible layer of revenue, capex, and our EBITDA. And now we have initiated the ESG reporting project 2.0, and I will deep further into that on the next page. So it is Ørsted's aspiration to be a global sustainability leader, and that aspiration combined with the focus from our stakeholders has kept us on the toes within this area, such as we have been setting a science-based target for our climate as the first energy company and several other things. And in the beginning of this year, our sustainability committee, they initiated this project to assess the whole ESG reporting and data needs. And of course, it's mainly driven by all of these EU regulation, but it's also driven by other things. For instance, our strategic priorities we have in our sustainability program portfolio. So it's both our biodiversity program, it's our supplier decarbonization program, and a lot of other programs. And of course, it's also driven a lot by our asset partners. We have many partners having a 50% share of our wind farms, for instance. And there's a lot of regulation for them within ESG to report on as well. So we have different drivers, but of course, the compliance part is a big part of that. And to the right side, I've just showed the main steps in the project. I will dig further into that in a moment. But in Q2, we started to understand the gaps based on the draft standards. And we defined the gaps and defined the demands and also assessed the implications throughout the organization. And now we are in the analysis phase where we try to go deeper into the as-is picture, identify all of the stakeholders, and there are many of them, I can tell you. And we're developing solutions and planning how to deliver. And then we expect to start implementing in the Q2 next year, and of course be ready in the beginning of 2025 with our first CSRD report for the financial year 2024. Next slide, please. Yes, and to dive a bit more into what we did in the first step. So we started to understand the regulatory requirements and what Ørsted is currently fulfilling. And then in addition to the ESRS standards, we also had to look at the other ESG information needs, primarily driven by these asset partner needs. So we did both at the same time. So we listed actually all of the data points at the lowest level from the ESRS standards, and that's around 2,000 data points in a big Excel sheet. also a bit like Anne showed, we did it actually in the same way. And we identified where are all of these data points currently in our reporting. So it's both, we looked into our annual report, our sustainability report, our ESG performance report. We have a governance report and a remuneration report. So all of those 5 reports all together, we marked where the information was currently published. And at the same time, we also listed the additional needs, data we need for ratings, for asset partners, our strategic priorities. So both of them ended in colorful output, as you see in the snip from in the bottom there. And then again, to synthesize this and assess these gaps and what we have mapped there, we had to understand the magnitude of the gaps, because some of them could be bigger than others, and their complexity to close differs also a lot. So we looked further into that, and also ensure, of course, that our other needs for the programs and our asset partners, they were adequately met. So again, a further deep dive into analyzing and again, coloring where are we fully covered, where are we partially covered, where do we have the gaps, and how do we think we can close them? How do we need, who should we reach out to, and how big a task was that? And that also ended in another colorful overview with some comments on what are the gaps about. And the last page. So it's obvious that meeting these demands requires changes. And it's not only changes to the way we report, it has implications across the organization, as we want to do this right from the very beginning. And I will also here refer back to the point Anne had regarding the assurance. We do have the limited assurance today, and the reasonable assurance will be mandatory from 2028. And it seems like there are many years for that, but I will imagine that many companies will do that before it will be the final deadline. So if we want to prepare right for this from the very beginning, we need to take that as reasonable assurance into account already now when we are changing the fundament in the organization. So we have set up work streams to manage what these demands require of us. And then we defined objectives and deliverables for each of them. And for instance, we have a work stream on governance with the objective of ensuring future-proof ESG reporting roles and responsibilities. And it involves many, many stakeholders. It's new role descriptions. It requires good change management. And it's also very important here to have the tone from the top. It would be easier if the CFO can cascade down the magnitude, the complexity, and the need to have the whole organization with us on this journey. And another work stream is about our IT platform, the whole digitalization, with the objective of how do we ensure robust data capture from the very beginning, and how can we improve our reporting systems, and also make the use of the data internally easier. How can we have different parts of organizations to help themselves to withdraw data from the system, which is not possible to do today. So there's a lot of things within the whole IT infrastructure that we should go through and rework to be ready to do this right. And then we had other work streams as well. I mentioned briefly the assurance part. So of course we're looking into that together with our Department of Internal Controls, because of course we have a whole setup already for internal controls, both on the financial and the ESG data, but there will be more ESG data in scope, and we need to raise the level of the ESG control to the same level as the financial controls. And then the last thing I will mention, it is that we should never forget about the risks. I think there are quite many risks in meeting these demands. And one of them is just, do we have the FTEs across the organization to manage and mobilize all of these new data and information flows? Because it's not an exercise only from the group functions, it actually has implications throughout the organization. And then another worry I have, it's do we have enough time to implement these changes, educating new roles, all of the documentation we need to have in place. I think that there are not that many months to be ready, because to be ready for the financial year 24, we need to be ready with the data from January 24, and we only have 13 months there. So I think that was my last point. Last page.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Goodbye. Yeah, and just say, as I said on the last page, have a good journey out there. It's an exciting mountain to climb. Thanks.
Thanks, Merete. I think that's very true. We'll go straight over into the Q&A, and there's a lot of different questions coming up in the chat. I think we'll also try to answer some of those afterwards in a written fashion, potentially when sending out the material, some of the main ones. Some of them are extremely technical, and I think some of them nobody has an answer yet, because some of the technical answers will probably come over time. But why don't we start with one to both of you, Merete and Anne, about how you rely, from Louise from Camp Lauritsen, how you rely on suppliers or how much you rely on suppliers to be able to live up to the ESRS reporting, and a question: will you put forward new data requirements to your suppliers compared to today's levels? Maybe Merete, do you want to start?
I think one of the, if I should have mentioned one more risk on that last slide, it would be all of that value chain aspect, because I think just to get the own operations up and running here, it's a big task in itself, and we do have so many suppliers, and I think a lot of companies, it's also the tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, because it's not only the first tier of suppliers. I think the impacts, they could be 3, 4 tiers down the line. I think it's something that we need to figure that out. We will start with our climate decarbonization program, because we already have engaged with our top suppliers there. So that will be the highest risk and priority within the decarbonization of the suppliers. But again, it will take years. We cannot fix that right away.
Thanks. Anna?
Yeah, sorry. So first of all, congratulations, Louise, on your new job. I think for my answer for this one, it's definitely about also keeping the transition in mind before we all go mad and ask all of our suppliers to report all sorts of data, and we will ask them in different formats and in different systems. I think there needs to be some sort of conversation happening around this, and I actually think it would be a clever idea for the EU to consider, at least for European companies, including suppliers. Is there somewhere that the sort of data you will be needed, there will be, just like we have to tag the information we will have to disclose here, could we also consider this for the requirements to the data that will be needed throughout the supply chain, because that value chain, because that would need, we could all harvest the same data and it will be efficient process for everybody. So to Pandora's point, we have started to investigate how we can do it. Point being that we want the dialogue. So right now it's a dialogue, it's a conversation, but it's also part of those conversations has actually already moved into being requirements into new contract negotiations. So it's actually been part of the dialogue when going in and saying, okay, we're going to renew the contract. Is there actually something we can do together here on, for, as Merete said, climate change? Is there something here where we have identical ambitions and targets? So therefore we have a shared interest in doing this. I think dialogue, having transformation in key mind before going out and building huge systems in order to capture all the supplier data.
Thanks so much. And I think there was also a question directed at you that you already started answering about, or answered on the kind of financial systems integration, finance side of things. Would you be able to maybe put a few more words to that? Because I think it's relevant for many more.
Okay, so to the ones, trying to do more things at one time is not always a good idea. I think what I intended to reply to the question was all about how much integration into existing financial system. I think we have done, we are using some of the financial systems, and then you can always say, how do you define financial system? Because we're also using the production system. as well to get to capture some of the data. I think from a kind of going in from above and down, it would be a good idea to get everything into systems. I don't think you should create a lot of other systems. You should look at the system and the data that you already have and then figure out how can we best capture this. In terms of using, you can say, the traditional financial system, like the invoice, kind of what goes through the financial system. So a good example, and I think Arla has done this very neatly, is if you build in, you're going to capture your payments to your on your energy consumption anyway. So if you just add kilowatt hours to that one, you are capturing, you can say, the same data. You don't both get the monetary value, but you're also getting the kilowatt hours. And the benefit of moving it into the traditional financial systems will come back to my point about already thinking about the reasonable assurance, because that means you're moving your control of your kilowatt hours into a financial system. So that means it's already gone through an IT control, IT controls, but also into some financial controls. So you just have to add the controls on the kilowatt hours, but you're actually benefiting or some of the work already being done in the organization. So that's a good point about moving it into the financial systems as well, where applicable, of course.
Thank you. I don't know, Merete, if you had any points to add there. If you're,
I think I fully agree. I can recognize many of the same things that we can use our SAP systems, put in more mandatory fields in the whole procurement, and we are also having negotiations with our procurement department, and we have a lot of people focusing on how do we put it into the contracts. We've done that for several years regarding code of conduct, human rights, you name it, all of these more governance, social sides, and also for the environment. So there's a lot to do there in the very beginning when you have the dialogue with your contractors, and also telling them to put it further down to their contractors, because I think, as I mentioned, it's many tiers down the line. So that's a lot of work, and of course there's a lot of work also doing risk screenings and ensure that your suppliers are doing this due diligence. There's a whole it's a whole area within the CSRD, which I think there could be a session for itself in 1 hour to talk about that. But yeah. I fully agree with Anna's point there.
Let's spend a few minutes talking about kind of internal resources to stem all this, because I think a lot of people will probably ask themselves, how many extra people do we need to hire? Do we need to hire extra people? Where do we even find these people given potential lack of capacity? And I see some of those questions going in that direction here. I'd actually like to hear from all three of you, Merete and Anniina, on your take on that question.
Yeah, I can go first. I think the first mapping exercise I showed we did in Q2 based on the draft standards. We had 2 people using around a month to do this work, going through all of the detailed data points, doing the mapping, doing the presentation to management. And then now we're looking into the work streams, the objectives there. And our CFOs asked the same question: how many people do we need? Which competences? Where in the organization do we need them? And we don't have the answer yet. It's actually, it needs some more analysis to be more clear on where do we need to hire the resources. Because I think it's not only in the group functions, it's actually changing the role descriptions across the organization, putting some more tasks into existing roles. I don't think you can just hire a handful of people and then you can fix it, because it's actually changing this, the people that is on board are ready to doing some tasks differently or additional tasks, and it can be hard to calculate in a big company how many extra hours does that take. And it also depends back to the double materiality assessment, what comes out of that, the magnitude of the gaps we're going to include and the number of indicators. So we don't have the answer yet. I guess at Ørsted you've been working with a lot of these impact areas already before to agree that probably many haven't, right? So it's probably more about integration than it might be to other companies. Anna, did you have any other comments around this?
No, because I completely agree with Merete on this. It's not necessarily about 10 headcounts more. There will be some additional resources needed, but it's about thinking about how it can be integrated in a manner in the existing processes. So I think for me, the key competence is actually being able to do the translation. So somebody who both have a kind of an idea, because I'll never claim that I understand all of the financial processes, but I have a pretty good idea of what goes on there. And what goes on, can kind of understand the organization, what goes on in the organization, but also have a content knowledge of sustainability. So putting that all into the same pot in order to get the integration going. I think, so for me, it would be about identifying the AI individuals who have that competence.
Makes a lot of sense. Anniina, did you have other comments?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. This is something that both internally in companies will have an impact on how sustainability data is run and how impacts are managed. But also externally in the wider world, this will trigger a need for new types of expertise. Because also, the auditing requirement that is being put now on a whole new batch of data, some of it very technical and sustainability, like requiring very deep sustainability knowledge, will also require a huge lift in that space to be able to do that type of auditing in a good, credible fashion across all of these themes. So that's a challenge of its own. I think that's one of the challenges EFRAG also has articulated in some of the public sessions they have run, that there really needs to also emerge a new field of competencies there. Internally in companies, as Anna also said, it is about also finding the right competencies in terms of what people already know, and also maybe combining resources from different departments. So I think one of the key shifts here is that sustainability reporting now can no longer only be the task of the sustainability department. You need finance, you need procurement, you need IT, you need your strategy department, you need supply chain to be all collaborating on this, because it's just becoming such an integrated part of how companies need to be transparent on different impacts across their operations and value chain, that just putting it on the shoulders of a usually quite small sustainability departments is probably not enough anymore moving forward.
Very good. Makes a lot of sense. There were some questions around the question of what happens if you don't end up reporting, right? And I think my colleague Emma already responded to part of that it's up to the member states to decide what happens then. I would, of course, also say that I think one of the reasons why we think this is so transformational is that if you don't report, right, that will be very visible. If you do report that you have impacts, but you don't do any, impact reduction or mitigation activities, that will be very visible, right? So even if there's not a big stick end of the carrot coming, there's probably a lot of implication in terms of competitiveness, but also, of course, investor and views and access to capital going forward for companies.
And of course, since this is now becoming an integrated part of companies' management reports, this will have an effect also on the assurance bit. So if you're not doing this properly, I think companies can expect to not see their annual reports approved moving forward. So that's also, of course, a huge implication for companies and their credibility. Of course, we also need to keep our eye on what's happening when the CSDDD, so the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, is approved, which has far more legal elements to it. And since these are also probably going to be coupled somehow to the reporting side of things and impact management, that's also where we might see some fines or other types of legal mechanisms emerge.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just, as on reflection and the kind of task that the EU has put throughout this, I would not be surprised. Okay, we all have to get this up and running, and then we get a pretty good idea what's in there. I don't think it will be left with that. I think there will be the disclosures, but I think the intention is that the disclosures are going to be used. Just like we see the EU taxonomy is actually going to highlight that the data being reported should be used by the financial institution in order to understand how sustainable their investments are. I think there is also things will be happening. That sounds very fluffy, but I expect that when they see what comes out of all of this, there will be not regulation, but I think we will see consequences to this in terms of many different sectors and others going in, making different initiatives following this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think much of that, also guidance, for example, on how to actually do this, the materiality, double materiality side, that will probably keep emerging over time.
Yeah.
We're at the end of the hour. There's so many good questions still. Just to say, we will be doing also 2 further webinars, at least, maybe also a supply chain specific one in the future, but the one about more the strategy side, related to this, to the ESRS and the kind of more transformative strategy processes that we think companies have to do in January, and one around the circularity products, impacts and design in relation to the ESRS, because of course also once you have to build systems to be able to disclose the material inflows, biomaterial and weight across the value chain, and integrating that into your design processes, that's of course also a big transformation for companies. Thanks again to both of you, Anne and Merete, for joining today. Thanks everybody on the line for joining. Good luck on this. Don't be disheartened. It is the change for the sustainability agenda that we've been looking for many years. So I think we'll all get there over time. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.